appreciate your interest. As many of you know, in January of 2018, my office filed a lawsuit against Motel 6. At that time, we had information that Motel 6 unlawfully handed over the private information of more than 9,000 guests across the state to ICE. We now know that Motel 6 unlawfully handed over the private information of more than 80,000 guests across the state of Washington to ICE without a warrant. I'm here today to announce a resolution that will ensure that Motel 6 does not repeat its unlawful conduct at any of its locations nationwide. Motel 6 will also pay the state of Washington $12 million to prevent this case from going to trial. They've also agreed to a number of injunctive terms I'll describe in more detail in a few minutes, and these terms will prevent this from happening again. This resolution holds Motel 6 accountable for its conduct. It guarantees restitution for anyone who is harmed by this conduct and sends a message to anyone else who would unlawfully share private information with ICE or anyone else. First, I want to thank El Centro for hosting this event. I've had the pleasure of being here many times, of course, so it's great to be here and appreciate them opening up their doors for all of us here to make this important announcement. I'm also going to make some introductions of some of the folks who are here with me, including some folks who will be speaking as well. We have 3 other speakers. I'm going to start with my legal team, who's done, as usual, excellent work on this case, to put it very mildly. These are all individuals from the Wing Luke Civil Rights Division. And so starting with Colleen Melody, who's the Division Chief of the Wing Luke Civil Rights Division, 2 of our Assistant Attorneys General, Mitch Reese and Andrea Brennicke, are both here as well. Alma Paletti, our investigator, and Judy St. John, a paralegal in that division, are all here as well. It's been a big investment of time and resources for more than a year to reach this resolution. One thing that was important to me and to the team that we communicated to Motel 6 on more than one occasion was there would be no settlement of this case until we received all the documents that we thought were relevant to determining who knew what and when related to this conduct and the extent of this conduct. And so we have some of that information to share with you here today. I also want to introduce 3 individuals who will also be speaking today. In the order we'll be speaking, I'll be followed by Jorge Barone, Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, Roxana Neruzzi, Deputy Director of One America, and Jimmy Mata, who's here in his capacity as Vice Chair of Latino Civic Alliance. All 3 of them will also speak, and then we'll take your questions. So first what I want to do is give you an overview of Motel 6's unlawful conduct when it voluntarily handed over the personal, private information of more than 80,000 guests to law enforcement without a warrant or their guests' knowledge or consent. Then I'll share a few examples of specific instances of how Motel 6's unlawful conduct didn't just hurt people but altered their lives in dramatic ways. Then I'll share the details of our $12 million agreement and how it will ensure that Motel 6 will not release this information in the future. So just a brief overview. Motel 6 employees voluntarily handed over this personal private information, again of more than 80,000 guests, to ICE without a warrant. And in our investigation, we found that 7 Motel 6 locations in Washington state divulged confidential guest information to ICE from a time period of February 1, 2015 through September 17, 2017. So February 2015 through September of 2017. Motel 6 voluntarily turned over their customers' room numbers, names, guest identification numbers, dates of birth, license plate numbers, and driver's license numbers. So just be clear, they would turn this over for all the guests staying at the Motel 6 at that particular time. So the ICE agent walks in, anyone staying at the Motel 6 at that time, all that information was turned over. The Motel 6 locations were located throughout our state: Bellingham, Seattle, Tacoma. There were 2 locations in the SeaTac area and 2 locations in the Everett area. Over the past 14 months, my team has reviewed corporate records, policies, training materials, and communications. We've interviewed witnesses, taken 9 depositions of employees, managers, and executives within the company. It's been a thorough investigation. We now know that corporate executives were involved in directing employees to share private guest information with law enforcement without requiring a warrant or showing that anyone was in danger. We now know that the company's actions were methodical. They trained their new employees to give out guest information to law enforcement without a warrant. Since these illegal practices have come to light, we now understand that the following executives are no longer working with Motel 6. Their CEO, their president and COO, that's the same individual, the president and COO, the general counsel, and the vice president for safety and security. Those four individuals are no longer with the company. Motel 6 employees in Washington State turned over this personal private information of guests to ICE nearly every day. And according to Motel 6 staff at 3 locations, the agents circled any Latino or Latina sounding names on the guest registry, asked questions about those guests, returned to their vehicles, presumably to run the names through databases. Our investigation and discovery, the documents we received through our investigation, revealed that ICE detained at least 9 individuals as a direct result of this practice. These individuals had no idea their actions, their whereabouts, their private business was given to the federal government without a single question being asked. Because of Motel 6's unlawful conduct, some people lost their jobs and homes and were separated from their families. So I'd like to share a few stories that we've learned since we filed this case. First, a Seattle man stayed at a Motel 6 near SeaTac where he was wrapping presents for his 4 children. ICE agents showed up at the Motel 6, addressing him by name, detained him, and shortly after deported him. His pregnant wife had to pick up their kids' gifts later on. Her husband was the sole provider for their household. She is now, not surprisingly, struggling to make ends meet with a toddler and 4 other children to care for alone. Another man, a Vancouver business owner and father of 6, who has lived in our country for many years. In fact, he's lived in the country for more than 20 years. ICE picked him up as he left in Everett Motel 6 after buying supplies for his small grocery business. After months in detention, he was deported. His wife and 6 children were not able to maintain the business or their home. The loss of a parent, of course, is quite traumatic, and several of their children are in therapy to cope with the loss of their father. Another Washingtonian was staying at a SeaTac Motel 6. The man has lived in the United States since the age of 1. He went to his car, parked in the Motel 6 parking lot, to get milk for his baby. He was approached and detained by ICE. He was held for 6 days in the detention center, long enough to lose his job. He was released and remains in the United States, but could not find another job for 7 months, putting financial strain on his young family. Yet another Washingtonian was detained for 7 months at the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma after staying at a Motel 6 in Everett. Despite winning his case for permanent residency, his legal expenses and inability to work means he is less likely to be able to afford a surgery that prevents him from becoming permanently deaf. He has significant hearing issues. Today's resolution ensures that more Motel 6 guests won't have to suffer as these families are suffering. I'd like to tell you a little about the resolution that will prevent this from happening again. This is a restitution case. What that means is we obviously keep our funds for the lengthy investigation that has taken place that we've expended, but the rest of the funds go to the individuals who've been adversely impacted by these practices. So it's a restitution case. So that includes, I want to emphasize, all of the 80,000 individuals who stayed at a Motel 6, the relevant Motel 6s, and had their information shared without their knowledge or consent. So in other words, the bulk of those folks had their information turned over to ICE. They had no idea that ever happened, probably still have no idea that ever happened. They'll receive some restitution. It also, of course, includes the families that I mentioned earlier. We know that more people were detained by ICE because of Motel 6's unlawful conduct, and an important part of what our communication is to the public right now is that we're asking anyone in that situation to contact our office. We will get a list from Motel 6 of the tens of thousands of folks who stayed at the relevant Motel 6s, but that does not tell the complete stories for those individuals, and we want to make sure the word is getting out to the public that if they stayed at one of those Motel 6s during the relevant time, of course, to contact us, but also if they have a story of being detained or deported, we most definitely want to hear that as well. You do not need to divulge your immigration status in order to submit a claim with our office. All the information someone needs to make a claim will be prominently displayed in our press release that I think you now have, and on our website. And this information, of course, is available in both English and in Spanish. We will, of course, individually evaluate every claim. In addition to paying the $12 million, a very significant sum for a case like this, obviously, Motel 6 signed a legally binding agreement to stop unlawfully providing guest information nationwide, and agreeing to oversight by my office to ensure this never happens in Washington State again. Motel 6 must also maintain privacy policies that ensure it will no longer share guest information with law enforcement without a warrant or other legal documentation or cause. From now on, employees that receive a request from law enforcement for guest personal information must contact Motel 6's legal team for authorization. Only after the company's legal team has verified the request is done lawfully may an employee hand over this information. Motel 6 will train all employees with access to guest information on this policy. It will provide a 24-hour hotline for employees that have questions about it. In the future, guests who believe that Motel 6 shared their or others' information unlawfully can call a hotline to initiate a complaint. Our resolution requires Motel 6 to publicize the hotline online so that their guests know about it. Motel 6 must maintain detailed records regarding information it shares with law enforcement. Motel 6 must report to my office periodically and provide us with any and all information on disclosures when we ask them for it. We will, to state the obvious, be monitoring their compliance with our legally enforceable agreement very closely. So now I'd like to invite Jorge Barone to say a few words. I just will say Jorge, he's just been such a great partner, really from even before, there you are, even before I became Attorney General, Jorge and I had a chance to, I knew him before, of course, in my days in the King County Council, but we had a chance to meet him before I became Attorney General and frankly have conversations about the potential for the AG's office to do more when it comes to the work we do on behalf of all communities in the state of Washington, a sentiment that I agreed with, and he's really helped in many respects shape the work of our office in terms of forming a civil rights division. And a case like this is in no small part due to the influence that Jorge's had in working with me and advising me, and for that I'm very, very grateful. Jorge.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Ferguson. My name is Jorge Barone. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. We're the largest nonprofit provider of immigration and legal services here in the state of Washington. And I really am here, first of all, to commend the work of Attorney General Ferguson and the entire team that is here. I face the same situation that we often get to take the credit for the work of a lot of other great people, so I'm glad that everybody's here with us to recognize the hard work that it took to get us to where we are today. And I think particularly because I think this is a particularly important victory on behalf of all Washington residents and consumers. I think it's just really important to underscore that businesses and other entities operating in our state must ensure that the privacy and dignity of customers is respected. All of us, everybody here in the state, constantly share personal private information with businesses and other entities with the understanding and the expectation that it will be protected and respected. Indeed, as today's news recognizes, it is legally required that they do so, as we've seen today. But this case was particularly troubling for many of us, of course, because it led to the targeting of particular community members and the profound difference that it had and the negative consequences that it had. And I can tell you personally, talking to some of the families who were impacted by the unlawful actions of Motel 6, the pain that it has caused. Attorney General Ferguson talked a little bit about some of those cases, but I think it's just really important to understand the impact that these illegal actions had on families is hard to understate, to overstate. I'm cognizant that one of the challenges in these types of violations is that they're often hard to uncover. We don't always know when that information has been shared unlawfully. So that's what is particularly commendable and important for our State Attorney General to devote the time and resources that is necessary to do the hard work to investigate and uncover these violations of the law. So again, I want to thank Attorney General Ferguson, the entire team for all of your hard work in making sure that these kind of unlawful actions are exposed. And I hope it also sends a message to others who may be thinking about engaging in this action to prevent the kind of pain that we've seen in our communities. So thank you again for all of your hard work. And it's my pleasure and honor to introduce my colleague and friend, Roxana Neruzzi, the Deputy Director of One America.
Thank you, Jorge. I just want to echo my thanks to you for all your great work for immigrant communities. I am Roxana Neruzzi. I'm the Deputy Director of One America, Washington's largest immigrant advocacy organization committed to building power in immigrant communities. We're proud to stand here today with the Attorney General and his team and fellow immigrant advocates, more resolved than ever to hold private companies like Motel 6 accountable when they violate individual privacy rights in order to help ICE tear families apart. Today's settlement demonstrates that we are a nation of checks and balances, and when rules aren't followed, there is accountability and retribution for the harm caused, particularly to vulnerable communities. It's a huge victory for our movement and the entire country that Motel 6 is entering a legally binding nationwide agreement never to engage in sharing guest information with federal immigration agencies again without a warrant. Washington is leading the way, not only defending our residents, but setting the standard for what protection looks like across the country. This, as Jorge said, will make other companies think twice before they work with ICE and cause more pain for our communities. At One America, we know the harms of separation caused by Motel 6's unlawful practices are not only emotional and physical, but they are financial. Families have lost their homes, their main sources of income, and their livelihoods. While no amount of money can ever make up for the turmoil caused by family separation, this settlement certainly brings some justice to the families who have lost so much that is irreplaceable. One America looks forward to working with the Attorney General's office to ensure those who suffer the most because of Motel 6's unlawful conduct contact the AG's office and share their stories so they can be eligible for restitution. And finally, I cannot understate the importance of having leadership on this, of why having leadership on this issue and champions for immigrant rights in every corner of our state and in every level of power is so important. Today, we send a strong message to the rest of the country that in Washington, we will protect the rights of all residents, regardless of immigration status, and won't tolerate anything less. And with that, it's my honor to introduce Jimmy Mata. Jimmy Mata is the mayor of Burien and is here today representing the Latino Civic Alliance.
Yes, good morning. My name is Jimmy Mata. Today I'm representing Latino Civic Alliance as the vice chair. Latino Civic Alliance is a statewide organization, and we support Attorney General Ferguson's effort to hold Motel 6 accountable. Why is this important? Well, one is because it's important to the residents of Washington State to make sure that the privacy of our residents is protected. You know, it's a tough time in these days to live as a brown person or an immigrant or a Muslim. And it's even tougher when corporate America has rules that impact individuals because of the color of their skin and because of what they look like. And today I'm very, very happy, and thank you, staff of the Attorney General's office and the team that brought some justice to the state of Washington, but not only the state of Washington, but are the leaders nationwide of what's right and what's wrong. You know, I hear stories every day of families that are torn apart, and I sympathize with them, and it breaks my heart to see that this is occurring. And we can't sit by idling and be quiet. This is where we stand up, we show leadership. And Attorney General Ferguson, thank you so much. You know, I'm very happy that I will be talking to community members and to talk about the impact that they had in their community, but that there was a result and that there was an action taken, and making sure that their rights were collected, and making sure that we continue to build a country and a community that is going to benefit all of us that live in this community. And again, thank you, and I look forward to going out and talking to community across the state of Washington to collect what's theirs and to understand that we still got justice in this country. Thank you.
Thanks to all three of you for those words and the work you're doing. Just before we take, I think now we can take questions. What I'm going to try and do, I know we have some folks, I think, on the phone, Brianna, is that right? So what I'm going to try and do is repeat the questions that we have here, so if there's folks on the phone, they can hear it, and we look forward to your questions. Yes, and then go ahead, then Joel.
I'm just kind of curious how they gave away the information so freely. I guess were ICE agents using sort of maybe leverage to extract it, or is it like the higher ups? Did they have some sort of political reason that they were just so freely wanting to give away the information? What did you kind of determine as to just how they just gave up the information so freely?
Yeah, so the question just is kind of a general question. Well, how is it that Motel 6 came to give this information away so freely, I think, to use your words? I may ask someone from the team to chime in as well. I mean, in terms of any motives they may or may not have had, Motel 6 would have to answer that, right? We've reviewed lots of documents, had many depositions. What we can say, it was a methodical approach. It was part of their training to turn over guest names to law enforcement, even without a warrant. Essentially no questions asked. A form would be filled out, right? There was a form that the ICE agent would fill out, and then the names would all be turned over. So I think something I would emphasize that this was methodical. This was carefully considered by Motel 6 as a practice with law enforcement. And but in terms of, I think part of your question was, hey, was there a political agenda they had? I don't think we can speak to that, right? That's a question for Motel 6 of why they had these policies, why they chose to allow this information be turned over to law enforcement without a warrant, for example, or without an emergency situation, which is in clear violation of Washington state law. So I think in some respects that's a question best for Motel 6. What we can do is explain what we saw, what their system was, how they trained their employees, what their form looked like. But in some situations that I think I might have mentioned, it was for some of those hotels, it was every single day. I think sometimes twice a day, if I recall, sometimes twice a day, that ICE agents would come to a Motel 6, they'd fill out the form, and every guest staying there, all that personal information was turned over. Joel?
They've signed, they've agreed to a settlement. They've signed a legally binding agreement. But nowadays, particularly with politicians, we hear, have you apologized? Did Biden apologize? Did so-and-so apologize? Has Motel 6 apologized?
I mean, you have to ask them if they want to issue an apology. They've issued some statements around this situation. I can say that a reason we got started with this investigation in the first place was because, as you might recall, Joel, there was a situation in Motel 6 in Arizona that made the news, where information was released. And I read about it like in the USA Today. I think I was traveling or something, and I read about it and called up probably Colleen or a member of the team to say, hey, I've read this. What I remember being struck by was Motel 6's response to that incident, in which they said it was isolated, right, and really tried to minimize it, which candidly made me a little bit suspicious, and asked the team to begin an investigation. And their investigation's been very thorough. So I'll let Motel 6 speak about how they view it. I can only say that the impact on so many Washingtonians is hard. Like Jorge said it, right? It's hard to overstate. And it ranges, right, from tens of thousands of people who people stay at hotels for all sorts of reasons. Some intensely private, right? You may be fleeing domestic abuse. You may be going on a job interview you don't want your employer to know about. There may be all sorts of personal reasons or professional reasons you're staying at a hotel. The last thing I think most of us think is going to happen is your information be turned over to the federal government without you knowing and in violation of the policies on the motel's website. That's at one end of the harm. And then the opposite end are the examples of the stories that I told where people's lives were, it's hard to find the right words, but that their lives were, look, it doesn't overstate to say their lives were in large part altered in very fundamental ways, to the extent where parents can no longer see their children, right? In cases like this, it's. I think one thing I want to emphasize is that the practices of corporations like Motel 6, those policies they put in place can have massive implications for their customers, for the people of this state, and this is a clear case of that. Yes.
So since they not only denied it, said it was isolated, but have this policy that is basically the opposite of what they were actually doing, is this not also a clear case of deception on the part of their corporate office?
I mean, and feel free, Colleen, if you want to jump in. I mean, Our case was, our legal claims was this was unfair, deceptive business practice by Motel 6, violating privacy rights of Washingtonians. So that was, I think it's fair to say, a key thrust of what our legal claims were about. And it was important to me that each case is different, obviously, but it was important to me and to the team that we review all relevant documents, take those depositions before entering into settlement. I made that very clear personally to Motel 6. There is no settlement. I'm not going to talk about it until we know exactly what happened, to the extent that we can. And that was important so the community knows, so the public knows, hey, here's what was going on. And look, we can't do that in every single case. We have a great team, but there's a limited resource we can do. But this case, because of the harm that was being done, because of the deception, because of the violation of their own internal policies, it seemed to me the type of case that we couldn't simply do a resolution and a payment and call it good. We had to dive very deep into their practices so the public can see and draw their own conclusions.
Just to clarify, so this binding agreement, is that limited to Motel 6 hotels operating in Washington State? What about those across the country?
So I'll have my team just make sure, because to work clear, because some parts are for Washington and some part there is a piece that is nationwide. So which member of the team wants to? So this is Mitch, who's been involved in the case from the beginning.
The provisions of the agreement provide that Motel 6 has to implement policies on a nationwide basis that prohibit them from sharing guest information with any law enforcement without legal process of subpoena, except in certain limited emergent situations. The policy that they're required to adopt applies nationwide.
How do you know that these policies are being enforced? I mean, yeah, you have check-ins, periodic check-ins, but how do you know that they're being enforced not just in Washington, but elsewhere?
The agreement has certain provisions of where they have to provide reports on a regular basis, reports of any guest complaints about disclosure of their information. They have to keep thorough records of all disclosures of guest information to law enforcement. And so there are some quite rigorous reporting, record keeping, and compliance requirements and that they're provided or required to provide to us over a 3-year period, every 6 months. They also have to provide to us within 10 days any complaint that they receive from a guest or consumer about that is concerned about the disclosure of guest information.
So this agreement is good for 3 years then?
Yes.
Okay.
And just to add to that, Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Motel 6 violated any of those terms, for example, that would put them in legal jeopardy with our office. That these are terms they must follow legally. And that's not unusual for resolutions we would have with civil rights or consumer protection cases where there's injunctive terms that the company must follow. They sign that agreement. If they don't follow those terms, there's a legal hook there if they don't follow those terms. So to your point, are there ever any guarantees that a company follows those? Of course not, but we monitor that very closely. They must provide that information, all the points that Mitch made. If they don't, and we discover that, they have a legal problem with their office at that point. Yes?
You mentioned 4 individuals let go. Mm-hmm. Are they national employees or were they within the state?
Oh, so let me just repeat that. So the 4 employees, executives of Motel 6
right.
who are no longer with the company, were they state folks or national?
Yeah.
So, no, those were their national, the CEO, the corporate counsel, the COO, if I recall the title correctly, and the security, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a security position as well, but VP of security. Those were all their national folks. Yeah, and those, all I can say about those is we understand that since these, want to be precise about this, since these practices came to light, we now understand those 4 individuals are no longer with the company. And Brown, are there folks on the phone? Is there a, oh, there's not, oh great, okay, good. So any final, and also I'm going to have a final, folks here want to have a final thought. I may have a final thought before I wrap up. Any final questions? Any final thoughts from either of you?
Well, I'll just add one thing that we want to emphasize to people who may have been impacted, and I know for a lot of community members who might hear this, who might have been impacted, and particularly if there was immigration enforcement or detention that happened, who may be reluctant to come forward, I do want to emphasize that we think it's important for people to be able to contact the Attorney General's office in the situation to explain what happened. Their information is going to be protected. So we do want people to come forward, and we do want to emphasize that in order to make sure that the restitution is given, that they should contact the office and provide the information about when they stayed and what happened, and there will not be any questions about immigration status. So I think I want to just reiterate that, because I know for a lot of community members it may be uncomfortable contacting government, and we appreciate that, and we generally are sending that message. But in this particular situation, this is a situation where we're trying to address a wrong that was made, and so we do want to encourage community members to contact the Attorney General's office.
Is that what that $12 million is going toward? Is to help with restitution? Is that?
Thanks for asking that again. So just to make sure I'm very clear, so Motel 6 is paying $12 million, with the exception of the money that we keep for the costs and fees that it took to do this investigation, which is extensive. The remaining funds will go for restitution. So we call that, it's a restitution case. That's where the funds are going. It's not going back to the state of Washington or anywhere else. It's going to these individuals. We will now be engaging in what's going to be a lengthy process, can lead to hear more stories of impacts to individuals and to families, to go through a claims process. That will take some time. So you'll be hearing back from us at some point in which we will know, hey, for individuals, for example, who stayed at the motel, but were not, let's say I had stayed at Motel 6 during that time. I don't even know that happened to me. For that group of folks, which is a very large number, there'll be a certain amount of money they're eligible for. For folks who were detained, for example, the 4 stories I mentioned, detained, in some cases detained and deported, the amount they will receive will obviously be a much greater level, to put it mildly, due to the impacts. But no two situations are exactly alike in those situations. Folks who were detained, just from the 4 stories I told you, you could already get a sense of different length of time being detained, whether you're deported, not deported, you get the idea. So we just want to be thoughtful about that process, because it's a little bit different than some of our claims, where it's pretty straightforward what the harm is and it can be allocated right away. We'll take some time to make sure we do a thoughtful process on that. But again, want to emphasize for folks to reach out to our office, especially if a family member was detained or deported as a result of these practices. And then just a final thought, I so appreciate the team that's done such great work again on this case. And when creating the civil rights, first it was a unit, it recently became a division. Given the size and the scope of their work, it's now a division in our office. They're often in the news for the work we do at the national level with the administration, travel ban, Dreamers cases, and those are obviously very, very important. The original conception when I created a civil rights unit, now a division, was essentially for cases like this, right, enforcing our state laws on behalf of all Washingtonians. And so this is, I think, exactly the kind of work that I hope we could do as a state. And to what I think earlier comments that were made is, we are the people's law firm. We represent everybody in the state. Everybody in the state. And it's important that everybody in the state understand that. So whether it's in this context or any other, if folks feel they're being harmed, their civil rights are being violated, their privacy being violated, contact our office. And I'm just so proud of the outcome of this case. A $12 million resolution is very large for a case like this. A privacy case, a case related to these types of violations. And while we can't undo the harm that was done, in some cases the really egregious harm that was done, we hope that the funds that we can return to those families and individuals will at least help as they cope with the ramifications of what happened to them as a result of Motel 6's conduct. And Joel, I'll stick around afterwards. Happy to take a question from you one-on-one afterwards. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time. Oh, yeah, of course. No, it's all clear. I remember our coffee well. Yeah, I remember it well. You gave me good advice. I listened to it. Well, that's what